Welcome to everyone who's listening to us to Radyo Kapwa. You're listening to 90.3 CKUT FM. I'm here with my co-host. My name is Veronica, Des, and then Laura, our sound engineer, and mabuhay to everyone. So how's everyone doing? There's a lot of things that we need to talk about or we want to talk about just to debrief. We had like a very successful event that happened on September 10, like last Saturday, about the Defund the Police, and Sant Kapwa, which is our mother organization, Radyo Kapwa, was there to talk about anti-Asian racism and model minority mutiny with friends. And a lot of conversations, lots of energy that was exchanged. And we just wanted to talk about it a little bit more for those who missed us at the park.
Thank you. Thank you, Vero, for sharing. And hello, everyone who's listening. This is Desiree, aka Des, Escalante Ruiz. So the event, the Defund the Police event on Saturday was truthfully my first event like that I've ever attended. And not going to lie, when I saw the flyer, I was like, oh, there were so many emotions that came up when you see in a flyer that's like defund the police. And I was like, oh, okay. Like there's like questions that went on in my mind. I was like, what is this? I've never gone to this. What is it going to be? Are there going to be a lot of people? And then obviously, like the minute I heard that you and Fran were invited to talk about the effects of policing, specifically in the Filipino community, and share alternatives to policing, I was like, yes, please, and I brought my 8-year-old daughter there, and it was a beautiful day in the park. And like my mind was blown, honestly. At the end of the event, there were so many sparks and fireworks that went off for me because of the feeling I felt being there and the people specifically that I met and the conversations that we had at the booth. Centre Kapwa had a booth there. We were talking about our goals and our missions and what we want, what we are creating with Centre Kapwa, but also going around to the other booths and hearing why other people were at this event. And again, I don't know about you, Vero, but it was so insightful. And I just want to shout out to a special someone that we met. We met May. I don't know what her last name is, but May is this super bright and like social Filipina that came to the booth. Well, side note is her and her partner saw the event online, lived in the area and said, hey, let's go to the event. They like going to events like that. And they got to the park, saw a bunch of white chairs with nobody sitting there and sat down. 5 minutes later, Fran and Vero get up to speak about the effects of policing on the Filipino community. And May came to see us after, and her mind was completely blown. And just to see all of the seeds that Vero and Franz planted with their talks, like she was just like, where have you been? Like, so some of the comments were like, where have you been all my life? I've never felt so seen. I've always felt these feelings, but like you put it into words. So again, it's just so amazing to see people. It's like this switch that turns off, right? When we hear somebody that looks like us talk about us in a different way. Laura, you're nodding. Please share.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when there's somebody that looks like us, we feel like we're capable of it too. We see ourselves mirrored.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yeah. That's why we finished our workshop with me quoting, nothing about us without us is for us. So you can't be talking about something for us if we're not there. So that was the energy that I wanted to bring in, to be like, we're here now. We affirm, recognized, and empower. Speaking of Defund the Police, also like gros merci for all of the volunteers, for all of the organizers who made this happen. I know it was like in the plans for a while. It's a little bit hard to secure permits here and there. It happened on Parc Giroir, which is like a park that I used to frequent when I was younger. After Saint Luc, you go in there. Laura, you and I went to the same high school, so it's like it's personal. For me, it was very personal to go to those places and then like talked about like hate crime that we have been experiencing when we entered COVID. But coming back to the Defund the Police organizers, it's very well rounded. There's different atelier spots that's been happening around. There were books if you want to have the resources, because we talked about hate crimes and such. So you can go to the booths that's selling books. Childcare. I want to point out.
Oh my God, my daughter didn't want to leave. My daughter didn't want to leave. She like got there. She sat at a table. She was making pins. She was like drawing at one point. She was 2 booths down from us, and I was like, "Are you good?" And I would always be able to see her, but she was having conversations with different people, and she said, "Oh my God, mommy, I don't want to leave." And I said, "Yeah, but we're wrapping up. Everybody's leaving." She's like, "But I made new friends and I want to stay." And I had shared this on my stories on Instagram. She said, "I didn't want to leave. I did so many cool things and I met so many amazing people with different pronouns." She's 8. I know. And I was like, oh my God. And my heart, like she was drawing with this indigenous man. He looked at her and he's like, "Can you draw me a candy?" And she was like, "Okay." So they started drawing candies together. She was just having her own thing. And I wasn't allowed to go to the table. She was like, "Okay, mommy, I'm good. Give me the water." She like sent me off. So she loved it. So hands off to the organizers at Defund the Police for making it a very, very kid friendly and kid welcoming event. My daughter loved it. It was amazing. But please, Vero, please share, if we're going to use May as the example, she was just like, what? Oh my God. And then again, the facts that you and France dropped, which again, people don't hear about this. Filipinos are not, right? This information is not necessarily spoken about often. Yeah. And I know from my experience that when I learned more about the culture with similar things that you shared on Saturday with friends, like again, my heart and mind and spirit sparked as well. So please share the topic.
Before I share it, I would like to point out that like, I'm not a green thumb. I can't grow plants. Like an aloe vera and snake like dies off me.
You're planting energetic spiritual seeds, not plants.
Yes. So I'm like, I'm a green thumb in another way. So let me drop some facts and like the academic in me and also my degree. I'm finally able to use my degree. I finished political science.
Yay!
One of the things that we talked about that made a lot of people nod was when we started talking about the lasting effects of colonial rule, that divide and conquer, the us and them mentality, and that colonial mentality of the crabs in the bucket. This was a lot of people were nodding in that. And the one thing that I always tell people when they start talking about the crabs in the bucket is like, who put the bucket? It's not us. The bucket, belongs to the beach. We thrived there. We had fun there. We chilled there, but we got put into a bucket. That's not our natural element. And so obviously everyone wants to get out of it. And obviously, that's when the mentality of bringing each other down rather than lifting each other up came from. And that's because we have been pitted against each other. So we move on to the us and them mentality. This is a very prevalent sentiment in our community, and not just in our community, in other immigrant communities, particularly those who were also former colonies. And that's because of the effects of colonialism with the divide and conquer. I always tell people that we had so much more similarities with, let's say, the other countries in East Asia, in Southeast Asia, even the Caribbeans, right? We have the same colonizers, so to speak. If you think about it this way, it's very easy for us to show solidarity with them because we share the same struggles. We have the similar struggles. And we recognize who, so to speak, the enemy. And I don't even want to say it because it's playing into the us and them, but like we recognize who put us in the bucket. And so for the colonizers to be able to control and manipulate and exploit us was divide and conquer. The divide and conquer is a political strategy that have been efficient this whole time, because not only that there's a divide and conquer within different communities, but within our communities, right? Colorism. That's like an inside and internal conflict of almost like a divide and conquer. Oh, you're more mestiza, therefore you magandang mukha, or like mukhang maamo, like those kind of things is like, it's harmful if you think about it, but it sounds harmless. We talked about model minority myth, where again, this myth was created by the colonizers to have a social hierarchy, right? So because we're a little bit lighter in the skin, we can look at those who have darker skin color and being like, we're better than you, right? Because in that hierarchy, the one on top is the white people. So the higher you are in lighter skin, the more you look down on people. So again, us and them mentality comes in. And then the stereotypes of like, oh, well, we're supposed to be good in math. I'm not good at math. I'm not good at math.
Neither am I.
And then it perpetuates with, like, let's say the movie Crazy Rich Asians, right? And in that movie itself, it reflects the reality of like those who open the door to securities are most likely from South Asia, and like the domestic workers are most likely you and me, and those who are like the bosses, that entrepreneur, the CEOs are mostly ethnically descent from mainland China, like a long time ago. So they're those kind of things. So it perpetuates all of these stereotypes that is more harmful for us. But we only have one representation, so we all eat it up. So there was that that is harmful for us. The hard worker, I don't want to be hard worker. I want to chill in the park and just do me. I'm so tired of the girl boss mentality. I don't want to do it anymore. And we need that spiritually enlightened. Then we never had assistance. Like pre-colonial, like we're very much rooted in our nature. We're very much rooted with our animals, and that was almost taken away from us. I say almost because the colonizers were not able to eradicate it because we're talking about it. So thanks for the ancestors to speak to us. Thanks for the guidance for that one.
Right. That was so beautiful. And please share, how does policing, because it was the Defund the Police event, right? So how does policing affect the community with all of this in mind?
84% of the SPVM officers live outside the island. So when I did the math, because I don't know the math, so I Googled it. I'm like, what is 84% of 4,500 people? And it's 3,780 Montreal police officers who don't live in the island. And that means that when they go to Uptown, they don't know the people in Uptown, and yet they police these people. So they go to a school where they're taught to follow this certain stereotype of if the pants wag down a little bit, they might be gangsters or something. They might be guns in it. So the institution where they're educated to be a police officer is just also in a sense pourri, with certain beliefs and there's certain laws that is not thinking about us because it was created for the colonial rule. The colonial rule is where they remain on top. We are an afterthought as immigrants. There is 44,000 Filipinos living in Montreal, and that was according to a Quebec statistics 2016. And most of us live in this Kodanesh and NDG area, and this is a physical divide and conquer. So not only that we were talking about divide and conquer externally and within our community internally, but there's also a physical divide and conquer where the immigrants are in a certain specific area, so it's much easier to police them. If you think about it, it's a very smart strategy, right? That's when the racial profiling comes in. That's where the intimidation comes in. And then it goes to a self-vicieux where these police officers keeps on coming into me when I'm playing basketball with my buddies, right? But this is my home. My apartment block is right there. My friends lives on that side. It makes it feel like there's no sense of belonging, and then they're feeling like they're being targeted, and then that's when they're feeling othered. So the mental health declines. It's all interconnected, right? You go to gambling because you're in a low-wage job. You're stuck in a low-wage job and you're ill-equipped to move up the social ladder. Culture and colonial rule, again, the internal divide and conquer of that utang na loob, that it could be translated in different ways, but it's debt from within, not debt you die, but debt credit card debt from within. And then that leads you to guilt because of that expectations of being provider, right? So you gotta go do it. And then the hiya, the shame. So a lot of our community revolves around with shame, oh, don't say that, nakakahiya. You're with a woman, nakakahiya, and our community revolves around what other people thinks of us in our community. That's a lot of people are nodding, and I feel like Des wants to say something. Go on, Des.
I have so much to say, but I'm just going to touch on shame, just this whole shame aspect, just because I've been unpacking this in the last few years, and where did the shame come from? The shame came from the colonizers that many, many years ago came and said, you're not enough, right? Essentially, you're uncivilized, you're this, you're not enough, your belief in animals, your belief in spirit, your belief in nature is uncivilized. We're going to make you better. So there's the shame, again, me becoming aware of the shame that lives inside of me. It's where does this come from? Where does this guilt come from? It came from the colonizers, right? The people that came and said that they are better than, and this hierarchy that you were talking about earlier, Vero, them, what is it, them versus us, or that you are less than. And that's why the seeds are so important to be planted, or this knowledge is so important to be shared, because it's bullshit.
It's bullshit.
Essentially, it's bullshit.
It's bullshit.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
We are enough. We are all enough. We have always been enough, right? And the moment we start to stand in that and ground in that mentally, physically, emotionally, and then spiritually, but it is a process. And so you and friends speaking at events like this, and us having these conversations, and us continuing to have these conversations and spreading the seeds, are so important, because again, there's the mental, emotional, or the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual unlocking that needs to happen, because for generations we have been told that we are not enough. For either it's in the church, either it's in the school, and then it like spreads into the family and all of these things. But when we come to a point where we're like, no, screw all of you and all of that, the pre-colonial like energy and spirit is like, we are freaking enough, you know? So it's like, that's one point that I want to say. And then just share the conversation that I had with my mom right before getting on this call. I had invited her to the event and I was like, Mom, what are you doing? I'm going to be in NTG. Fran and Vero are speaking at this event. She's like, no, I have to go to church, obviously. And then she called me today to ask me about the event. And I said, oh, it was, and just for context, she's turning 82 tomorrow, you know, very loving. Love you, Mom, if you're listening. But when she heard it was a Defund the Police event, her initial reaction was, "Hi, what do you mean defund the police? What do you mean the police are not bad?" And I'm like, it doesn't mean that they're bad, Mom. And we had this beautiful conversation. And I said, it doesn't mean that they're bad, Mom. It just means that this was an event where we discussed other ways that you can allocate the money. Because right now, a lot of money is being allocated in the police, whereas this was a conversation to talk about where else they can distribute the money. And ideally, in this case, they were saying to promote organizations. And then she said, her first comment was, oh, but it starts in the homes or something. I think she intervened in two kids fighting at Namura Plamenon Metro. That's what she was saying. She was like, I saw these two kids fighting. And she said, you know, you have to talk to each other. And my 81-year-old mother in the Metro, like intervening in a fight. And she's saying, you know, you have to talk to each other and you can't fight. And I said, that's beautiful, Mom. That's great. Like, good for you for intervening on like youth fighting. I said, but what do you think is happening at home? And she was like, oh, but they have to talk. It all starts at the home. I said, but if the mom, you know, came here to work and she's cleaning or taking care of other kids or cleaning a house in Westmount, who's taking care of her kids? And then like my 81-year-old mom, you could feel the seeds, even planting in an 81-year-old woman. She's like, huh. And then she said, oh, but they need to invest. They need more after school programs and they need more extracurricular activities outside of school. I said, you know that they do exist, Mom. They just don't get funding. And she's like, huh. Oh. And then she was like, well, I'm really happy that you're involved in this. And I'm really happy that you're going to events, and Fran and Vero are talking at events like this. Because again, it was to make, because she's somewhat disconnected, right? Like she's lived her life, she's paid her dues and everything. And it's easy for her to be like, you stop fighting and you should talk at home. And I'm like, but nobody is at home. And why is nobody at home? Like, let's start asking why. Why are these kids on the street? And then I went as far as to tell my mom, you know, these kids come here, they're forced to go to French school. So they feel like they don't belong. They're in a new country. They feel like they don't belong. Their moms are out, not taking care of them, but out taking care of white kids. Right? Let's state the facts. Out, never home, right? Mom comes home depleted. Kid is like, I don't know what to do with myself. I don't feel like I belong. I don't feel comfortable. I'd rather be back home. What's the easiest thing? The vices, the bad things, right? And then you have cops that don't live on the island, don't understand this at all, don't understand the culture. It's, okay, you're bad, you're going to go to jail. But like, if there was that point of compassion, right? So again, going back to the defund the police, like think about, you know, the seed that I want to plant now is, can we think of other alternatives to where this money can go to serve the Filipino community and other communities?
Yeah, that's really great. Like it touches what I'm going to point out more which is like the lack of resources that you were just saying, that like there's a limited access to, let's say, educational training. So almost 60% of Filipinos do not speak French. And this leads to them being stuck in a vicious cycle of like low wage earners or like no upward mobility. And then, like you said, there's like no sports or recreational or after school programs. And 35% of Filipinos in Montreal are youth. And that is the age of 24 and under. And that's a lot of youth. That's a lot of youth with no soutien. And then there's no resources in terms of mental health as a newcomer. And then there's lack of awareness and involvement in the community. So we're more prone to be taken advantage of, which again leads us back to like the model minority myth, where like you gotta go suck it up. It's better than nothing, right? So you just accept like this salary. Sometimes they don't even know what is the lowest minimum wage, right? So it's just like it's better than nothing. A lot of Filipinos, we came for a specific immigration wave. So our immigration status is sometimes, most of the time, kind of connected to our employment status. And so there is a fear of repercussion, and that means that they might jeopardize their immigration status, which is connected to their employment status. And this again leads to abuses, exploitation, and manipulation. They cannot vote. So on policies, bills that affect, or I would say target even immigrants, an example like the Bill 96. And then we are permanent, temporary foreign workers. So like the tightening of borders leads to uncertainty. So there's no resources or incentive to learn the language to be more competitive in the labor market. So we're setting them up for failure. That's what it is. We want you to come in here, work low wage minimum job, and set you up for failure, and then blame you for not speaking French because there's no resources. And then it takes years, even decades, with like S at the end, like, to get stable immigration status. So this is like gatekeeping bureaucracy in all levels of our government. And to just finish off, our alternatives for policing for the Filipinx community would be empowering the community to be aware and educate about their rights. That's my shit. That's me. I wanted to really equip our community to know their rights, encourage them to participate in direct politics, not just in Facebook. I just want you to vote. You know, you want to vote. Spaces that encourage Filipinx decolonization. So like there's good spaces where we can be who we are, but also that decolonization that is clearly lacking in all levels, not just in our community, but in other communities. Intergenerational leadership, civic engagement, and community capacity building. We've been so focused on just working and providing and padala at home that like we forgot that we have a community here, directly here. More cultural and community-based funding, please. This is the overall theme that we talked about in Defund the Police. And then more representation in decision-making process. So that's why I said nothing about us without us is for us.
Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah.
So any couple who wants to send us music, if you want to hear that song on the radio, you can send them to at Radyo Kapwa. So Alan from last episode, who we interviewed, awesome artist, sent us a list. You guys want to help me choose which one?
Let's do Looney.
Looney, Paliwala.
Sa mundong mapangusga, mapangmata at mapanuri, dapat hindi ka basta-basta nagpapa-apekto sa mga paninirang buhay, lalo na kung galing lamang sa mga mahihinang uri. Sabi sa akin ng bathala, matapang ka pala, pusong leon, kaya dibdib mo ay walang mga daga. Alam mo bang mga pangarap mo ay pansamantala, lamang samantalang ang kapalaran ay sa mga tala. Nakatala, kaya pala parang tamad na mag-aaral, walang kadala-dala, walang pambaon. Pero kahapon pa ako handa, maglakad sa gubat kahit natakot sa palaka. Inakit ang kabundukan at paghapong naggala, inabutan ng dilim, munti ka na akong mawala. Sa sarili ko, pagabang ko wala kong makapana, sa dulo na pala ng bangin, wala nang kawala. Bumalo na lang kaya ko, kakayanin ko kaya ako'y napadasal, sabay salto padapa. Bahala na si Batman, yan ang saktong kataga. Tsaka na ako gagawa ng mga pakpak ko pababa.
Pinagkapang bawat hamon ng mundo, lumaban, nakipaglaro ng apoy at patintero kay kamatayan. Bitbit ko ay panalangin, paglabas ng pinto, nakakapunit na ng hangin, sa salubungin ay ayakapin ko.
Talaga nais manira ng pangalan, ngunit karamihan ay takot tumira ng harapan. Pag hindi ko na malaman kung kaibigan o kalaban, tinitihan ko na lamang at
Ayakapin ko.
Kahit gano'ng kapait na naranasan, masakit na nakaraang hindi ko matakasan. Walang hawang tadhana ay tatawanan, kahit gano'ng kasama ng kapalaran ay sabi sa'kin ni Satanas, mayabang kawala. Tuturuan kitang kung paano magpakumbaga. Di ka na maisasalba ng mga kantang mong gawa. Paano mo tutubusin ang kaluluwa, matagal lang lakas ang namin na makailangan at makakangal para lang ikaw ay mahalin na madla. Abilidaan ang katalyo lang kaso lang halata na hindi ka handa. Kaluluwa kapalit na sikata niya na usapang nakatakda sa kontratang to na may pangalan mo na nakalagda. Teka lang, wag ka ba kasigurado, di mo pa ako pag-aari dahil ang titulo ng kaluluwa ko'y nasa akin at ang kasunduan natin ay puro lamang usapang hangin. Kasi autograph ang nilagda ko sa kontrata at handa akong tahakin ng mahabang landas pabalik. Baliwala ang pagod na sakit basta pag-uwi, yakap patalig ng aking asawang malupit at dalawang anak kong makulit. Para sa kanilang kapakanan gagawin ko lahat ano makabalik.
Tinanggap ang bawat hamon ng mundo, lumaban, nakipaglaro ng apoy at patintero kay kamatayan. Bitbit ko ay panalangin, paglabas ng pinto, nakakapunit pa ng hangin, sa salubungin ay ayakapin ko. Ano man ang hangarin sa akin ang langit, kakayanan ko. Sugatan man ang malalim, kagos sa damdamin ay tila balewala.
Tatanggapin ko ng buo kahit pagkaano kabait.
Tila balewala.
Sasagarin ko hanggang sa buto kahit pagkaano kasakit.
Tila balewala.
Akitin ko ang pinakatuto kahit pagkaano katarik.
Tila balewala.
Bawat suntok na sinalo ay may tadyak na kapalit. Dinuduro ako ng mundo kaya ingaratan ko pabalik. Tinanggap ang walang kwentang mga hamon para bilhin si Lumi. Binenta ko si Marlon. Matalo man ngayon, bukas ang pwersa ko'y babangon. Pangako mas malakas pa ng triple kesa sa kahapon. At kung putapete ang kanibate pare di bali na lang walang pakialam. Miski hirangin pinakamayabang at kahit maraming kalaban na balak sirain ang aking pangalan ay baliwala. Kasi wala naman ako peki imahin na alagaan. Kaya
Tinanggap ang bawat hamon ng mundo, lumaban, nakipaglaro ng apoy at patintero kay kamatayan. Bitbit ko ay panalangin, paglabas ng pinto, nakakapunit pa ng hangin, sa salubungin ay ayakapin ko. Ano man ang hangarin sa akin ang langit, kakayanan ko. Sugatan man ang malalim, kagos sa damdamin ay tila balewala.
Gano'n talaga nais manira ng pangalan. Ngunit karamihan ay takot tumira ng harapan. Pag hindi ko na malaman kung kaibigan o kalaban, linitihan ko na lamang at kahit gano'ng kapatid na naranasan, masakit na nakaraang hindi ko matakasan. Walang hawang tadhana ay tatawanan, kahit gano'ng kasama ng kapalaran ay tatanggapin ko ng buo kahit pagkaano kabait. Sasagarin ko hanggang sa buto kahit pagkaano kasakit. Akitin ko ang pinakatuto kahit pagkaano katarik. Bawat suntok na sinalo ay may tadyak na kapalit. Dinuduro ako ng mundo kaya ingaratan ko pabalik.
Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Marvin Reyes, a youth leader and a community organizer, here bringing you important news back home in the Philippines. The article I will be sharing with you is from New York Times with the title, Philippines Rebuffs International Court Over Duterte's Wars on Drugs. The Philippine government on Thursday officially rejected a request by the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court to resume an investigation into former President Rodrigo Duterte's war on drugs, which left thousands of people dead. The statement was the clearest indication yet that the President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who took office in June with Mr. Duterte's daughter as the vice president, would try to shield his predecessor from any independent investigation in the war on drugs. Right groups had feared that the alliance between the Marcoses and the Dutertes would mean that no one would be held accountable for the death of thousands of victims. Last September, the International Criminal Court authorized a full investigation into Mr. Duterte's bloody war on drugs. It had preliminary evidence to show crimes against humanity had been committed. It later suspended the inquiry after the Philippines said it would conduct its own. Last month, the court asked Manila to respond to its prosecutor's request to reopen the investigation. But the Office of the Solicitor General, which is the chief lawyer of the Philippine government, argued that the International Court is The Hague has no jurisdiction over the Philippines. The alleged murder incidents that happened during the relevant period do not constitute crimes against humanity, the agency said in a statement. During Mr. Duterte's presidential campaign in 2016, he pledged to deploy the police and the military in all-out assault on criminals to kill them all. Activists say the vast majority killed were poor Filipinos, some of whom were young boys, had nothing to do with the drug trade. The Philippine National Police said roughly 8,000 people had been killed in the violence, but rights groups have reported higher numbers. Carlos Conde, a senior Philippines researcher for Human Rights Watch, said the rights group had found no compelling evidence that the government was seriously investigating the drug-related death. In fact, the killings are continuing, Mr. Conde said, and the impunity for police officers and others implicated in these abuses by all accounts remains intact. Cristina Palabay, Secretary General of the rights group Karapatan, provides support to families of drug war victims, said the Philippine government's response indicates its inability to acknowledge the injustices experienced by the victims and their families. Considering the political coalition of the Marcoses and Dutertes, we know that they won't prosecute Duterte for the alleged crimes against humanity. Ms. Palabay said, "For the next 6 years, no police investigation is deemed independent, which is why we believe that an international independent investigation is needed." Last month, Marcos, whose father led the country for more than 2 decades, said that the Philippines had no intention of joining the ICC. Mr. Duterte pulled the Philippines out of court in 2018, and Mr. Marcos has said any investigators seeking to visit could do so only as tourists. Only 3 people have been convicted in the government's often indiscriminate campaign against crime. They were 3 police officers found guilty of murdering a 17-year-old student who was shot after the officers claimed that he had fought back. But a CCTV camera showed the men led the boy away, generating an outcry among the public. A separate internal investigation into 52 drug war deaths showed that police officers did not follow protocol and often use excessive, deadly force. The article is written by Jason Gutierrez in September 8, 2022. Thank you so much for listening. Maraming salamat sa pakikinig. Once again, this is John Marvin Reyes, bringing you Philippine news from abroad.
Mabuhay, you're listening to Radyo Kapwa, CKUT 90.3 FM, and we are here with Kat Daaca from Manitoba, and you have a very big description in here that I don't want to say it out. I want you to present yourself. So the floor is yours, Kat Daaca. Please present yourself to us.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, my name is Kat Daaca. I'm a negotiations educator and expert specializing in decolonized negotiation strategies. I'm also the vice president for the Manitoba Filipino Business Council as part of the council's first ever female majority board of directors. So we're really bringing this new, fresh energy to the council. I'm also a chairperson for Kultivation FAMD. We're a grassroots volunteer organization where we look to highlight the food, art, music, dance of Filipino Manitobans in the province. And we're actually right in the middle of Cultivation Festival. So there's 20 different events happening around the city. So I just have immense FOMO at every moment of the day in this past weekend because you can't actually go to 20 events in 3 days. So been very exciting. By trade, I am a supply chain management professional. So that's kind of the work that I've been doing in a corporate space for the last decade. And I'm sure as we get into some of these questions, I quit my corporate job right at the start of the pandemic. And that's the corporate life that I've, taken a little break from. But yeah, I spent the last decade as a buyer. So by trade, that's kind of what I do and how I ended up over here. And I'm just so excited to be here. Thanks so much.
Okay, we are very excited to have you in here. And before we start, we actually want to do a little bit of icebreaker. And so we have a question for you. As what would be the ate advice or big sister advice that you wished you have gotten? And what would be some ate advice that you would like to impart to everyone who's listening to us?
Oh, that's such a great question. And I'm very annoying. So I'm always that ate who's like, okay, look, stick with me, girls. Like, I got some advice for you. I think as of lately, the one that's really top of mind for me right now is like silence all of the noise around you. Like there is so much noise around you. There's people telling you what to do and how to do it. And I think growing up the way that I did, I'm the youngest, I'm bunso in my family, not just like my immediate family, but like my cousins, like I'm bunso, like I'm the youngest one. And I think everyone just, by default knew or felt like they knew what was best for me or good for me. And I didn't trust my own decision-making growing up. I looked at everybody else for a cue on what to do. And I'm really getting into this space now where I'm fully trusting my ability to make my own decisions, feel good about those decisions and not have to validate them with anybody else. So my big other advice right now is just quiet the noise, listen to yourself. You know exactly what you need to do. Just trust in yourself. And I think we've been very conditioned not to. And there's lots of beautiful parts of Filipino culture where it's like, yes, I want to exist in community. I want to exist in relation and not have to act alone. But in that, decision making around like, who am I? What do I want to do? Like nobody can tell you what that is except for you. So
I love that. Thank you so much. I can totally feel like my inner child being like, oh my gosh, I wish I had that ate who was saying these things to me. So hello, everyone. Fran Stoner here. Happy to be here, joined by the team, joined by Kat. I just wanted to share that Kat and I actually met just recently at the Pinoys on Parliament conference. I was the person moderating the Discarte panel. So it was like a panel of Filipina entrepreneurs. And when the team of Pinoys on Parliament came up to me first to kind of moderate this panel, I was like, why do I want to moderate a panel of entrepreneurs? Like, I'm totally not that person. I'm the community person. I'm the activist, who's always a kind of really loud, brown, and proud about like decolonizing everything. So I was like, why do you guys want me to like do this do this panel of entrepreneurs? And then when I looked into who was on the panel, I was like, oh, wait a minute. These are some amazing Filipina entrepreneurs who are literally decolonizing what that means, right? So it was really a panel that brought together and demonstrated the innovation and leadership in like the respective fields of like these amazing Filipinas. And I was just honored and blessed to connect with Kat because, like at the end of the day, I think a lot of us are doing that work, that inner work of like, what does it mean to decolonize? But we also all have to go into a workspace almost every day, right? That is a colonized space because we all have to pay bills. We have to put food on the table. So I guess my first question to Kat is, how did incorporating decolonial values kind of come about into your daily work?
Yeah, when I think about the career path, career trajectory that I've had, I'm again like a decade into my career, quote unquote, and it's really just in this last little piece of it where I've really actively been incorporating decolonial values, right? Like those two words together didn't really exist for me early on in my career. I didn't know anything about that. I didn't have a community of people or anyone in my life really talking about it. So when we look at kind of the beginning of where I started, 10 years ago, I finished my degree. I went to a business school that was extremely white. I, jumped right into the corporate world, and I just bought into this belief that I needed to act like all of them in order to get ahead, in order to fit in, get jobs, that kind of thing. So, I didn't even really realize what I was doing, but I just knew that I needed to fit in and get in with all of the white kids. So I was like very much on all the student councils. I was volunteering for everything. I was the president of the supply chain organization. And, you know, even just like at the networking events, like the way that I speak or the way that I present myself, what I'm wearing, like it's all, it didn't ever feel like true to me, but I just knew that that's kind of like, okay, this is the game we have to play in order to get ahead. And quite frankly, like coming out of my degree, I was very serious about my strategy around getting jobs, getting opportunities. And it was think, be, act, do like a 35-year-old white guy. Like literally that's what I had in my head. I left so many parts of myself at home just to, again, like bamboozle the white people into giving me opportunities. And unfortunately, it kind of worked in terms of like every job that I've had and been able to kind of bring that forward. But incorporating decolonial values, like it's really just come in the last couple of years, being able to be part of things like cultivation. And the people around me I can feel this like collective awakening in the community. And that's kind of where it all started. I didn't know any of these things on my own. And I'm very, very grateful that, you know, even through the pandemic, we've been able to mobilize very quickly online. And I think that's kind of expedited that incorporation of decolonial values in my work.
And I have like, as you were talking, thank you so much for sharing. There was like bing, 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 a million questions that ran through my head. But like, what was that one thing that sparked you? Because you're like, I completely resonate with your complete journey. And, you know, it's like, it's more, get the certification, get the degree, be the president of the association, you know, fit into these white spaces. You know, I've spent the last 3 years now decolonizing and becoming more and more aware of my journey or seeing my journey with different lenses, right? You know, if you recap your journey, it's like, I have to get the degree. I have to be the president of the association because being Filipina is not enough, right? So again, it goes back to this not enoughness. So I'd just like to know, like, what was that spark? You know what I mean? Like, what was that spark for you that you were like, oh my God, and then the decolonizing, whatever happened?
So much of what you said just like hits so hard. And I've been really reflecting lately on the ways in which I associate achievement, my competitiveness within a corporate space, with like investment in whiteness, right? Like as I actively divest in whiteness, I'm like, okay, why am I so hyper competitive? Why do I have to be the best at everything? Why? Like, it's because I'm not enough. You nailed it. But to answer your question, it's community. The answer is community. Like cultivation started right before the pandemic started. And for the first time, like this group of organizers within cultivation, they are just like a wealth of information. They're highly educated. There's lots of people from different backgrounds and professional places. But the common thread is that people are very actively decolonizing in that space, right? So I was introduced to all these conversations around decolonization that it never existed for me before. I didn't really have access to it or know it was available. And they really were the group that kind of sparked all of that within me. And I'm very grateful to have been part of it. But yeah, we did a lot of, group work and like, you know, sessions together. And even there's another group in Manitoba that does amazing work. They're called Prairie Asian Organizers, and same thing. They will put together workshops for model minority mutiny. And that workshop, I think, also was one of those big kind of spark moments where I was like, wow, I had no idea. Like I had language for all of the things that I felt or things that were swirling around in my head, but I couldn't grasp it without the language, right? Without being able to do that in community, without that mirror or people to validate that experience. And it changed everything for me, like being able to do that in community. So I would say it's those community groups that really kind of, that was the pivotal time, I think.
I love that. And it's, again, just like re-emphasizing the importance of community and conversations. And just some fun facts about my journey is like, I've known Fran for over a decade, I don't even know how long, 15 years. And about 7 years ago, she was planting seeds. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's great. Next, you know what I mean? Like it didn't land, it didn't resonate, but she just kept on planting the seeds. And then one day, it blossomed. And one day it, like, again, there was this spark. And one day I started to get curious and started to ask, more questions. So again, we need to thank you for planting these seeds, right? Thank you for creating spaces where people can get exposed at whatever process they're at or wherever they are on their journey. So next question is how, you were talking about corporate America being competitive, or corporate Canada being competitive, in these white spaces, but then going to these community events and having these seeds being planted. So how does one merge the two? How do we sustain that? How do we do that? Working full time, what is this? How does one balance both? Right? Or transition out of the corporate space or the colonial mentality in the workplace?
I wish there was a really easy on-off switch.
That's a loaded question.
I know. And that and it happens in the tiny moments every day is what I think, right? I think the way that I talk about things, especially within the workshop. So Reclaim Your Wealth is the workshop that I put on for negotiation skills training. And that's the workshop that I offer into community. But the way that I like to put it is almost like tiny acts of liberation, right? So I think when we look at the question that you've asked, it's almost overwhelming. It's a little bit scary to think about because it's I have to do all of this work. How can I just decolonize my work and my mind? It just feels almost overwhelming, but I think it's in these small moments, right? So when I think about divestment in whiteness in a corporate workspace, for me, it's okay, every day I'm just gonna maybe accessorize in a way that I would want to, or wear an outfit that is maybe not what we would wear to a corporate setting, but it's just a tiny win. It's a tiny message to myself that I can just be myself and that's enough and that's okay. I also, again, think about that hyper competitiveness and having to be the best at everything. And I'm trying to release the expectation of myself to have to be the very best at something. And also maybe not caring as much, right? Yes, we do work in these spaces and yes, we want to get ahead and get more money. But again, if there's ways that we can self-advocate for ourselves in other ways without burning ourselves out completely in these jobs, I think, again, that's something we can kind of slowly work towards. And again, I don't think it's a hard switch from one way of thinking to another, but I think in these tiny moments every day, it's you know what, I am going to log off right at 4:30 so I can make it to that community event at 6. I'm not going to work late. And that's, again, in these tiny little things every day, how we can just reclaim those pieces of wealth and pieces of ourselves back again. But I think it is almost important to keep it in these little micro moments, right? And I think that's training for the times where we might need to ask for something bigger, right? Again, kind of thinking about the workshop that I put on, it's in these tiny moments where we build the repetitions to be okay, now I'm ready to go to my boss and be you know what, I actually need $10,000 more per year. So how do we get there, right? And that's a big conversation. That's a big, scary conversation. But I think in the repetitions of it, the everyday, you know what, no, I choose myself today, or I choose what I want today is a really easy way to just kind of start warming up to it, getting closer to. Yeah.
I love that so much. Thank you for sharing. And actually, that was the piece that had stuck out for me during your panel of just remember that, at the end of the day, we live in this toxic, oppressive world. If I put my therapist hat for a second, the lines always get blurred because I'm always mental health counselor and community organizer, because I couldn't just be a mental health counselor because it was this thing where I would work on people's healing with them one-on-one in a closed space, and then you'd have to release them back into the world, right? And then the harm would happen again. So I love this idea of okay, no, we have to accept this is kind of a toxic space I need to walk into every day to feed my family, to make sure my rent is paid, to make sure there's food on the table. But what are the tiny little acts of liberation daily that I can do to help sustain myself? And I love this so much. And I also love that there's this movement happening of can we just act our wage? Why I think the panel that I moderated that you were on was so powerful too is we started off with that conversation of unlearning all that, right? Because my initial reaction was discard. So first of all, I wasn't sure what discarte meant. So Vero helped me with that one. Vero's kind of my Tagalog dictionary when I'm not sure, but also not just dictionary, but she also, I love her because she also gives me kind of the mainstream societal context of what what it means. So discarte, for those who don't know, means to hustle. And I think that in our culture, we see that as a positive, right? We're hustlers, we're hard workers, we're the model minority, we do so good. But on the other end of that, it's really like the martyrdom, the like working 3-4 jobs and normalizing all of this, right? And the culture of like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and it's okay. If you work hard enough, everything's going to be amazing and everything's going to be perfect, which is not true, right? So how might we reclaim and empower ourselves and see discarte in a different way of like, let me hustle for my well-being. Let me hustle for like my self-love, my self-worth. And I know like Vero has so many thoughts on this. So I'm going to pass the mic to her to have a few moments with you, Kat, because when I told her that I was bringing you in, she was just like, oh my gosh, so many questions, so many things, like both Des and Vero. So
thank you. Thanks for having us again, Kat Daaca. First of all, when I was reading your bio, I'm like, whoa. And the first thing that came to my mind was like, negotiations educator? Like, what? And then you go like, decolonial work, negotiating. I'm like, that's something, first of all, decolonization is already a very intimidating word for those who don't know it. And then negotiating, I can already hear my mom being like, no, we don't negotiate. Right. So please tell us more about like your decolonial work of negotiating and like, how does this link to, our radical love and self-loving us and building who we are and the way we want it, knowing our words?
I love the tie back to like a radical self-love, because that's exactly it. And I do love this very unique intersection of things like negotiation and decolonial work, because we just like, we're not trained to do this well. Like we have been conditioned to be very bad at negotiating, like to feel bad, like super hiya to ask for anything. Like we have just been very conditioned to okay, let's just be grateful and take whatever we can. But what I do think about negotiating as a skill, and France really like made a great point about, what, we still have to exist in this oppressive ass world. So how can we exploit back through this skill of negotiating, right? And again, like in the workshop, in the work, I don't expect anyone to ever go from like 0 to 100 when it comes to being able to negotiate and self-advocate for themselves. At the end of the day, self-advocate for themselves. So really, again, it's these little things every day. How can we build up the self-confidence and self-worth to really get ourselves there? Because I really think negotiating, that skill is so critical as an access point to resource, right? To jobs, to opportunities, to apartments, rent, cars. Like every day we're negotiating for something. And, if we are already set up to feel like we're going to fail in those moments, if we already feel like I don't deserve this, or I shouldn't be asking for this, like, do you really think we're going to get the things that we truly deserve in this world? Like, no. And the systems are perfectly built for us to feel this way, and for wealth and resources to stay in certain places with certain people. And for us, it's like, no. Like we are also here and we are also deserving. So really that's kind of the essence of it all, is that, this skill is so critical and we're not really taught how to do it. It seems very scary, and we're trying to bring that level of fear down within us. And a big message within the workshop is really just, again, like quieting the noise and listening to our internal voice when our internal voice says things like, oh, I don't deserve this, or, oh, I shouldn't be asking for this. Like, whose voice is that? Whose voice is that? Because I guarantee you, if you sit with it long enough, it's voice of the colonizer, right? So in those moments, it's like, even if I can just get you to that point where you have a self-awareness around, okay, that's actually not my voice. If I had it my way, if I listen to my truest, best, highest self respond in this moment, and it's not like, oh, no, I don't want anything. It's, no, I deserve this. I want this. Or it's, even the example I give very often is like when something comes out to your table at a restaurant and it's slightly incorrect, and we don't want to self-advocate for ourselves in those times. It's like, no, just do it. Like, you are here. You deserve the best of everything. Like that, I think, is a really simple exercise. I love giving people that homework because they always feel so bad to send something back. And I'm like, no, just try it. Just try it one time. And again, it's these tiny moments, tiny acts of liberation, I think is the work. It's the practice. And when we think about decolonizing the word work, right? Like, in the panel that we were in together, this is the work, right? It's not just like a corporate job. The work is our self-love and our self-advocacy. Like work can look very different. It's our rest. So I like claiming that word back, like the hustle and work as other things, right?
Laura and I were like, yes. This is coming back to our icebreaker question. Be like, what would be the advice? And this is it. This is exactly the advice that I would tell my sister. I would tell everyone who calls me ate, right? Like you know what our work is, and we should learn how to negotiate this. And your work will plant more seeds down the line. And so to close off this very great discussion that we have in a few sentences, I know it's really hard, in a few sentences, what would Kapwa mean to you?
This has been a lot more important to me lately. Like again, same thing with like the decolonial work. It wasn't really something that made not any sense to me, but I just like, I didn't know, or I didn't have language or education around it. But even the Baybayin symbol for KA, I don't know if you are familiar at all with Baybayin, but it's 2 lines and then 1 line connecting the 2 parallel lines. And it's meant to symbolize like 2 rivers and then the connection between the 2 of them. And it's literally in my name. Like it's literally within my name, like connection and Kapwa, like it's me. Like I truly do not believe that I exist alone here. I exist in my relations, and I don't want to exist alone. I think is kind of the big message to myself now. It's just like, I don't want to live on this island by myself. Like I want to pour back into community. I want to be supported by community. I want to, again, like have this shared existence and identity. And I think, again, even in these, when we think about these times where like, okay, I'm questioning my own voice, like whose voice is that when I'm feeling like I'm not worth it or I don't love myself enough? It's like, okay, but look at everything around you, right? Like you are divinely supported at all times. And for me, that's kind of that idea of Kapwa too, where it's like, I'm always divinely supported, always held by community, even when I feel very alone. So it's just like, yeah, I don't actually exist alone. It's impossible.
Thank you so much for it. See, you can never really just summarize it in 1-2 sentences. I tried to really do it. It's impossible. But we thank you so much for giving your time and sharing your knowledge and planting more seeds at the background. Radyo Kapwa is very honored and happy to have you with us.
And reminding everyone, if there's one thing to remember from this conversation, is tiny acts of liberation.
So for community announcement, we have a mouthful one. So the first one would be the Pan Asian Collective will be hosting a series on cooking Indian food starting September 16. So check out their IG page at PAC Montreal, PACMTL. And then next one would be Force Jeunesse will be holding their 16th edition of Rencontres Maîtres Chez Vous with Pauline Marois as a keynote speaker on September 17. They are a youth-led nonprofit organization with a perspective of intergenerational equity and work towards defending the rights and interests of Quebec's youth in the development of public policies. Our very own Franz will be on a panel on how to make mental health support more accessible. Next up would be My Chinatown Montreal will be hosting a Mahjong night during their Chinatown night market also on September 17. So looking forward for that one. The next would be La Voix des Jeunes Comte, collective advocates for addressing sexual violence in elementary and high schools, will be holding a press conference on September 18. More details on their IG, please, at La Voix des Jeunes Comte. Then lastly, we will have a Indigenous Art Festival and Market. So this will be held on September 17 from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. at Lucia Kowaluk Park, corner of Depin and Park. So thank you so much for listening to us. And just like what Laura says, mabuhay.